Welcome to another Excel tutorial. In today's video, we're diving into the world of named ranges, what they are, how to create and use them, and most importantly, why they can make your work in Excel much easier and more efficient. We'll explore how named ranges can simplify your formulas, make your data more readable, and help you build dynamic tools like drop-down menus, flexible charts, and smarter calculations. Whether you're working with small tables or large dynamic data sets, understanding named ranges can save you time and reduce errors. By the end of this video, you'll not only know how to use named ranges, you'll also understand exactly when and why to use them to take your Excel skills to the next level. Let's get started. We'll start from the very basics. What is a named range? In Excel, a range simply refers to a single cell or a group of cells where data is stored. But when we assign a name to that range, it becomes a named range. Instead of using standard cell references like A1 to A10, you can give that range a meaningful name like sales or product list. This makes your formulas easier to read, reduces errors, and helps you work more efficiently, especially in large spreadsheets. So, the easiest way to create a named range is to simply select, for example, the sales data for the computer, which is located in cell C10. Then, go to the name box, which is located to the left of the formula bar at the top of the Excel window. In the name box, type in the name Computer Sales and press Enter. The reason we use an underscore instead of a space is because Excel does not allow spaces in named ranges. And let's say that in cell E10, we want to increase this computer sales in 5%, we just type equal, and now we do not need to select the cell reference anymore, and we can just simply type the name Computer Sales. Then we multiply it by 1.05, and there you have it. Now we can do the same for all the sales of our product list. So we select all the range from C10 to C12, then go to the name box, and we can type sales. Now let's say that I want to calculate the total sales of this products. Just simple type equal sum open parentheses. And now we do not need to reference the cell anymore. We can just type sales and close parentheses, and we have the total sales. We can do the same. For example, if we want to calculate the average sales, just type average open parentheses, add the name ranges and close parentheses, and there you have it. Earlier, we used the name box as a quick shortcut to create a named range. But there's another method that gives you a bit more control. This time, we'll use the Formulas tab. Let's walk through it. For this example, we'll use our table with data from software sales. First, select the entire range of sales data, from cell H10 to K14. Once selected, go to the top of the screen and click on the Formulas tab. There, you'll see an option called Define Name. Go ahead and click it. A window will pop up with a few fields to fill in. The first one is Name. Just like before, this is where you decide what to call the range. Let's name it Software_Sales. Again, we're using an underscore instead of a space, since spaces aren't allowed in named ranges. Next, there's a field called Scope, which lets you choose where this named range will be accessible. By default, it's set to the entire workbook, which means you can use the name on any sheet. We'll leave it like that for now. Lastly, there's the Refers to field, which should already be filled in with the range you selected, H10 to K14. Everything look good? Great. Click OK, and your named range is ready. Now, just like before, we can use this name in our formulas. For example, in cell M10, if you want to calculate the total of all those sales, simply type the sum function and enter the name range software sales. And in cell O10, if you want to calculate the average, just type the average function and the same name range. And there you have it. Excel handles the rest. Using Define Name from the Formulas tab is especially useful when you're working with larger datasets or managing multiple named ranges. It's a neat, organized way to keep your spreadsheet clean, efficient, and easy to navigate. Let's continue. Imagine now that you'd like to change the name of a named range, or perhaps delete one entirely. The process is quite simple. Just click on Name Manager, and a list will appear showing all the named ranges we've created so far. From there, you can create new ranges, delete existing ones, or edit them as needed. For now, though, we won't modify any of the existing ranges. Instead, we'll create a new one. this time to represent only the sales data from the year 2020. Since we're already in the Name Manager, Just click New, and the dialog box will appear. Let's name it Microsoft Sales. Again, using an underscore because spaces aren't allowed. This time, I'll also change the scope to a specific worksheet, which tells Excel that this named range should be accessible only within that sheet. Let's test what that means. I'll go to another worksheet. In this case, I'll choose Sheet 1. In any empty cell, I'll type an equal sign and try to reference the named range we just created. You'll notice that Microsoft Sales doesn't appear in the list of available named ranges. That's because its scope is limited to the specific worksheet we selected earlier, so it can't be accessed from other sheets. Now let's move on. In our product table, we just created named ranges for sales in 2020. So under the sales of the year 2020, I will calculate the total sales. I will use the sum function and add the name Microsoft Sales. Now if I want to drag this function, I can't because it's fixed. In order to be able to shift the function, I will go to Name Manager, select our named range, and in the Refers to field, I will take out the $sign by pressing F4 3 times to convert it into a relative reference, then click OK. Now because the reference is no longer locked, you'll be able to drag the formula across the table and have it update dynamically for each row or column. Now notice that if I want to change the scope of a named range by going to the Name Manager and selecting Edit, Excel doesn't allow me to change the scope directly. So, in this case, I want to change the scope of the Microsoft Sales named range to the entire workbook. To do this, I first delete the existing named range. Then, I create a new named range using the same name, Microsoft Sales, and leave the scope set to Workbook, since I want to be able to use it across multiple worksheets. However, don't forget to unlock the reference again. Now here's something very important. Even though the scope is now set to the workbook, you might still notice issues. Let's test it. Go to Sheet 1, use the sum function, and try to calculate the total sales using the Microsoft Sales named range. You might notice that the total is incorrect. It's pulling data from the wrong location. This happens because if we go back to the Name Manager and look at the Refers to field, we'll see that it's still referencing the previous worksheet. To fix this, delete everything before the exclamation mark in the reference so that it becomes a relative reference without being tied to a specific sheet. Then press OK. Now if you go back to Sheet 1 and try again, you'll see that the named range works correctly across any worksheet. At the beginning of this tutorial, we explored how helpful named ranges can be in Excel. They make formulas clearer and easier to manage by replacing cell references with meaningful names. However, we also noticed a limitation. When we create a named range by simply selecting cells, it isn't dynamic. That means if the data grows or changes, the range doesn't automatically adjust. And that's exactly what we're going to address in the second part of this video. To make a named range dynamic, we need to use a combination of functions, specifically the offset and COUNTA functions. These allow the range to expand or shrink based on the amount of data in your table. In the third part of this section, we'll take things further by incorporating index and match, which are powerful functions for dynamic data retrieval. Let's focus now on a specific example. We have a table, and I want to create a drop-down list that displays a list of employee ID. When I select an ID from the list, I want to retrieve all the corresponding details for that employee. So, in order to do so, select where you want the drop-down to appear. Then go to the Data tab and click on Data Validation. Choose List. Select the range from A5 to A504 and press OK. At first glance, this seems to work. But there's a problem. When I add a new ID at the bottom of my table, it doesn't appear in the list that you have created. That's because our range isn't dynamic. It's fixed. This is where a dynamic named range becomes incredibly useful. Here's how to build one. First, in any empty cell, I'll type the offset function. The first argument of offset is the starting point of our range. In this case, I'll use cell A5 and lock it using the F4 key. Next, I enter 0 for the row offset because I don't want to shift vertically, and 0 again for the column offset because I also don't want to shift horizontally. For the height, I'll use the COUNTA function, which counts how many non-empty cells there are. I'll apply COUNTA from a 7 to a 1000. I'll apply COUNTA from a 5 to a 1000. Again, I lock this range with F4 to avoid any issues. I don't need to provide width, so I just close the parentheses, and now I have a formula that defines a dynamic range. Next, I go to the Formulas tab and create a new named range. I name it ID range and paste the formula into the reference box. It's important to make sure all cell references are locked correctly. Now that the named range is set up, I return to data validation, choose list, and this time I type an equals sign followed by the name of the range, ID range. And now, every time I add a new ID at the bottom of the table, for example, ID 1000, it will automatically show up in the drop-down list. It's a seamless way to keep your lists updated without any manual intervention. If you're curious about how to use the DGET function to retrieve specific pieces of data from your tables, I've included a separate video link in the comments that dives into that topic. It's a very useful tool that works well in combination with named ranges. Now let's move on to dynamic charting. On the left side of our sheet, we have some raw sales data. On the right, we've built a matrix that summarizes this data. I've also added two drop-downs, one for selecting a name and another for selecting a store. These will allow us to update the matrix and eventually our chart dynamically. When I change the selected name or store, the matrix refreshes automatically with new values. In this example, I've used the SUMIFS function to populate the matrix, although you could use index and match as well for similar results. My goal now is to create a chart that shows the total sales per year for a selected store, and I want that chart to update every time I choose a different store from the drop-down. To do this, I need to create a dynamic named range that pulls the correct data column based on the selected store. If Store A is selected, the range should return cells from column L. If Store B is selected, it should pull from column M, and so on. To achieve this, I go to an empty cell and begin writing an index formula. I start by defining the array of cells that contain the sales data, in this case, L6 to N11, and lock that range with F4. For the row number, I want to include all rows, so I enter 0. For the column number, I use the match function to find the position of the selected store. The store is selected in cell M15, which I lock as well, and I compare it against the header row from L5 to N5, which is also locked. I set the match type to exact and close both functions. What I now have is a dynamic formula that pulls an entire column of sales data based on the selected store. With the formula ready, I go to the Formulas tab, create a new named range. This time I'll just call it Chart Range, and paste the formula into the reference field. Once I've confirmed that, I can delete the formula from the worksheet, as the named range now contains it. Now it's time to build the chart. I begin by selecting the sales data for Store A and insert a clustered column chart. I add a chart title and link it to cell M15 so it updates with the selected store name. Then I right-click on the chart and choose Select Data. In the horizontal axis labels section, I click Edit and select the range of years so that the chart has the proper timeline on the X-axis. For the final step, I go to the Legend entries, click Edit, and in the formula, I delete everything after the exclamation mark and replace it with the name of the dynamic range we just created, chart.range. After pressing OK, the chart becomes fully dynamic. Now every time I select a different store from the drop-down, the chart updates automatically to reflect the new selection. And that wraps up today's video. If you'd like to learn more about how index and match work together to retrieve data, I have a dedicated video covering that topic in depth. As for named ranges, we've only scratched the surface. They have many practical uses in real-world Excel work, and today's examples are just the beginning. If you enjoyed this tutorial, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. It really helps support the content and lets me know what to create next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with more Excel tips and tutorials.